My name is Leland, a 68-year-old retired contractor from Boston. The house I built with my late wife Margaret is my greatest pride. My son Thomas was always the light of our lives, and when he introduced Jessica, I thought our family would grow stronger. I never imagined my future daughter-in-law would humiliate me at her own wedding, demanding my home and slapping me in front of everyone. What happened next changed everything. If you are watching this, let me know where you are from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to see how two men made her cry 15 minutes after my phone call. Life after Margaret passed from cancer 5 years ago was never the same. The house we built together became my sanctuary, filled with 40 years of memories. Every nail, every board, every inch of our 3,000-square-foot colonial-style home in the suburbs of Boston carries the imprint of our lives together. I built this place with my own hands when Thomas was just a baby, working evenings and weekends for nearly 3 years to complete it. The kitchen, where Margaret taught Thomas to bake cookies every Christmas. The backyard oak tree with the tire swing where he spent countless summer afternoons. The living room where we gathered for movie nights every Friday for 20 years. This house is more than wood and concrete. It is the physical embodiment of my family history. Thomas moved out when he went to college, but always came back for holidays and random Sunday dinners. After Margaret died, those visits became even more important to me. He would stop by twice a week, sometimes just to check in, other times to share a meal and update me on his life. I treasured those moments. 2 years ago, Thomas announced he had met someone special at the architectural firm where he works. Jessica was a client relations manager there. They had been dating for 6 months before he introduced us. I remember that first meeting vividly. She was beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive-looking watch that seemed to catch the light whenever she moved her hand, which was often. She complimented the house but asked several times if I had considered downsizing. At the time, I thought she was just making conversation. She smiled at all the right moments and asked questions about Thomas as a child, but something felt rehearsed about her interest. Still, I was happy to see Thomas so in love. His eyes followed her everywhere, and he kept checking for her reactions whenever he spoke. As they dated longer, I noticed small red flags in Jessica that worried me. When we went out to dinner, she was charming to us, but cold to the waitstaff. She frequently mentioned the neighborhoods where her friends lived, all of them in wealthy parts of the city. Whenever Thomas talked about his childhood or our family traditions, she would quickly change the subject to future plans. Once, when Thomas was in the kitchen getting drinks, she glanced around my living room and said, "This place has such potential. The right designer could really bring it into this century." The comment stung, but I smiled politely. This home had always been filled with love, even if the furniture was not the latest style. Despite these moments, I kept my concerns to myself. Thomas seemed happy, and that was what mattered most to me. Margaret would have wanted me to support his choices. He was 32 years old, established in his career, and ready to start the next chapter of his life. I did not want to be the stereotypical interfering father. When Thomas announced their engagement after a year of dating, I embraced Jessica and welcomed her to the family. Thomas and I had never been closer than during the early days of wedding planning. He would call me for advice about venues and ask for my opinion on various decisions. Jessica seemed to tolerate my input at first. As the wedding date grew closer, I noticed Thomas calling less frequently. When I would reach out to him, he often seemed rushed or said Jessica was calling on the other line. The few times we did get together in person, Jessica dominated the conversation, frequently interrupting when Thomas and I reminisced about the past. One afternoon, about 3 months before the wedding, Thomas stopped by alone. We sat on the back porch with beers, just like old times. He confided that Jessica was under a lot of stress with wedding planning and her job. He asked if I could be patient with her mood swings. Of course, I agreed. Family sticks together through challenges. I shared stories about how Margaret had occasional difficult days too, and how relationships require understanding. What I did not tell him was how Jessica had called me the previous week to ask if I would consider gifting them my house as a wedding present, since I did not need all that space anymore. When I gently declined, explaining the sentimental value, she had laughed it off as a joke, but there was an edge to her voice I could not ignore. Still, I held on to hope that things would improve after the wedding. Many people become stressed during wedding planning, I told myself. Once they were married and settled, Surely Jessica would relax, and our family bond would strengthen. My son deserved happiness, and I was determined to help make his marriage a success. If that meant overlooking some concerning behavior from Jessica, I was willing to do so. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come, and that my willingness to keep the peace was about to be severely tested on their wedding day itself. As the months passed, Jessica took complete control of the wedding planning. Though I had offered to contribute $20,000 toward their special day, my opinion on how that money was spent became increasingly irrelevant. Jessica selected an exclusive country club venue without consulting me, despite knowing I had hoped they might consider the lakeside park where Margaret and I had been married. When I received the formal invitation in the mail, I noticed it listed Jessica's parents, the Hamiltons, as the primary hosts, with my name almost as an afterthought at the bottom. This despite the fact that the Hamiltons, while certainly wealthy, judging by their Beacon Hill address and vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, had contributed less financially than I had. Thomas became the reluctant mediator between Jessica and me. "Dad, Jessica feels strongly about having orchid centerpieces instead of the wildflowers you suggested," he would explain over the phone. Or, "Jessica thinks a seated dinner is more appropriate than the buffet style you mentioned." Each time, I swallowed my disappointment and reminded myself that it was their day, not mine. 3 weeks before the wedding, I visited Thomas's apartment to deliver an antique pocket watch that had belonged to my grandfather. I thought it would make a meaningful something old for him to carry on his wedding day. As I approached his door, I overheard Jessica speaking to someone inside. "Leland is so stuck in the past," she was saying. "That dinosaur actually suggested we have a chocolate fountain at the reception. Can you imagine how tacky that would look in our wedding photos?" Thomas needs to move beyond his father's blue-collar sensibilities. I stood frozen in the hallway, the small gift box suddenly heavy in my hand. When I finally knocked, Jessica answered the door with a picture-perfect smile, as if she hadn't just been mocking me. Her friend, a thin woman with sharp features, gave me a pitying look before slipping past me to leave. That evening, I invited Thomas to dinner alone. Over steaks at my kitchen table, I tried to have a heart-to-heart conversation about family values and marriage. "Son, marriage is about joining not just two people but two families," I said carefully. "Your mother always made sure our home was welcoming to everyone." Thomas nodded, cutting his meat with more force than necessary. "I know, Dad. Jessica is just particular about what she wants. Her parents raised her with certain expectations." "And what about your expectations?" I asked gently. "Marriage is a partnership. Your voice matters too." He looked up, and for a moment I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "Things will get better after the wedding. Jessica says the planning is stressing her out, that's all." I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe that the woman my son loved was not the calculating person I was beginning to suspect she was. The rehearsal dinner, which I hosted at an upscale restaurant downtown, should have been a joyful occasion. Instead, it became another stage for Jessica to demonstrate her growing disregard for me. When I stood to give a toast welcoming the Hamiltons to our family, Jessica checked her phone throughout my entire speech. Later, when I tried to share an amusing anecdote about Thomas's childhood with her grandmother, Jessica cut me off. "I think we've heard enough stories about Thomas as a little boy," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "We're celebrating our future, not dwelling on the past." Mr. Hamilton, Jessica's father, gave me a sympathetic glance but said nothing. Mrs. Hamilton simply adjusted her pearl necklace and pretended to be fascinated by the dessert menu. That night, alone in my house, I sat in Margaret's favorite reading chair and spoke aloud to her, something I often did when troubled. "I don't know what to do, Maggie," I whispered to the empty room. "I don't think she's good for him, but I can't bear the thought of losing our son." The next morning, I woke with a determination to maintain my dignity no matter what happened. For Thomas's sake, I would endure Jessica's slights and hope that someday, somehow, she would come to appreciate the importance of family. Or at the very least, that Thomas would not forget the values Margaret and I had raised him with. As I pressed my best suit and polished my shoes for the wedding, I never imagined just how tested my resolve would be before the day was over, or that Jessica's true nature would be revealed in such a dramatic and public way. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect early summer weather. Sunshine streamed through my bedroom window as I carefully dressed in the charcoal gray suit I had purchased specifically for the occasion. I attached Margaret's favorite tie pin to my silk tie, a small silver oak leaf that she had given me on our 25th anniversary. In a way, it felt like she would be with me today. As I adjusted my collar in the mirror, I could almost hear her voice. "Remember, Lee, it's about Thomas's happiness now," she would have said. I nodded at my reflection, steeling myself for whatever the day might bring. Before leaving, I retrieved a small package from my safe. Inside was a set of antique silver cufflinks that had belonged to Margaret's father, along with a handwritten letter expressing my love and hopes for Thomas's marriage. I had also included a check for $10,000 as a surprise additional gift. Despite my concerns about Jessica, I wanted to start their marriage on the most generous footing possible. The wedding was scheduled for 3 o'clock at the Newbury Estate, an elegant venue with manicured gardens and a restored Victorian mansion. I arrived an hour early, wanting to have a moment with Thomas before the ceremony. As I entered the venue, I was immediately struck by the lavish decorations. Crystal chandeliers had been brought in to hang from the garden tent. Enormous arrangements of white roses and orchids adorned every surface. A string quartet played softly in the corner. I estimated that the flowers alone must have cost more than my entire contribution. When I asked a harried-looking wedding coordinator where I might find the groom, she directed me to a suite on the second floor. I knocked gently and entered to find Thomas alone, struggling with his bow tie. "Need some help with that, son?" I offered, setting down my gift. His face brightened momentarily before a shadow of anxiety crossed it. "Dad, you're early. Jessica's parents haven't even arrived yet." I stepped forward to assist with his tie. "I wanted a few minutes with you before everything gets crazy. You're my only child, after all." As I straightened his collar, I noticed the tension in his shoulders. "Is everything okay, Thomas? Wedding day jitters are normal, you know." He avoided my eyes. "Everything's fine. Just, Jessica has a specific vision for today, and I don't want anything to disrupt it." "Including me?" I asked quietly. Thomas finally met my gaze, looking torn. "Jessica feels that, well, she thinks it might be better if you sit in the third row rather than the front row during the ceremony. Her extended family is quite large, and with her parents' business associates." The implication was clear. I, the father of the groom, was being relegated to secondary status. I swallowed hard but nodded. "Whatever makes today easier for both of you." I handed him the gift, watching as he opened it. His eyes grew damp at the sight of his grandfather's cufflinks. "Dad, these are perfect, thank you." He read the letter silently, his Adam's apple bobbing as he struggled with emotion. When he discovered the check, he looked up in surprise. "This is too generous. You've already contributed so much." "That's what fathers do," I said simply. "Your mother would have wanted you to have it." A knock at the door interrupted us. Jessica's maid of honor, the same sharp-featured woman from the apartment, poked her head in. "Jessica needs to speak with you right away, Thomas." Something about the florist making a mistake. Thomas quickly tucked my letter and check into his inner pocket. "I have to go, but thank you, Dad, really." After he rushed out, I took a moment to compose myself before heading downstairs. The venue was filling with guests now, most of whom I didn't recognize. I spotted a few of Thomas's childhood friends and colleagues from his firm, but was struck by how many strangers were present. As instructed, I took a seat in the third row. The second row in front of me remained empty even as the ceremony began, a visible reminder of my diminished status. Jessica's mother gave me a brief nod of acknowledgement as she was escorted to her front row seat, but her father didn't even glance my way. The ceremony itself was elaborate but impersonal. No mention was made of family traditions or heritage. When Thomas and Jessica exchanged vows, I noticed his voice shook slightly while hers remained confident and clear. She looked stunning in her designer gown, but her smile seemed practiced rather than joyful. At the reception, I found myself seated at a table far from the main wedding party, with distant cousins of the bride and a few elderly guests who seemed equally out of place. My place card had my name misspelled as Leland rather than Leland. When I approached the head table to congratulate the newlyweds, Jessica barely looked at me. "Thank you for coming," she said automatically, as if I were just another guest rather than her father-in-law. "The ceremony was beautiful," I offered. "Thomas, you look so happy." My son smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks for understanding about the seating arrangement, Dad." Jessica cut in before I could respond. "Thomas, we need to greet the Petersons." They flew in from Chicago. She pulled him away without another word to me. Throughout the dinner, I attempted to connect with Jessica's family. Her mother answered my questions politely but briefly. Her father, a successful real estate developer, according to Thomas, seemed interested only in discussing property values and investment opportunities. "You're still in that old house in Brookline, aren't you?" Mr. Hamilton asked between bites of filet mignon. Thomas mentioned it's quite sizable. Sitting on what? Half an acre? Yes. Nearly 3/4 actually. It's been home for 40 years now. He nodded thoughtfully. Prime location. Worth a small fortune in today's market, especially with the improvements in that school district. You ever consider selling? No, I said firmly. Too many memories there. He shrugged. Memories don't appreciate in value, something to consider for your retirement planning. As the evening progressed, I overheard fragments of conversation that increased my unease. Two women I didn't recognize were chatting near the bar, unaware of my presence. Jessica has it all mapped out, one said. First the wedding, then the house, then partner track at her firm before starting a family. What house? Asked the other. Thomas's father has this gorgeous colonial that Jessica has had her eye on since day one. Apparently she's already talking about renovations. I moved away, my stomach knotting with apprehension. Later, when Jessica's father cornered me again, his words took on new meaning. Family legacy is important, don't you think, Leland? He said, swirling his scotch. Ensuring the next generation has the foundation they need to succeed. Before I could respond, I noticed Jessica watching us intently from across the room. She excused herself from a conversation and began walking purposefully in our direction. In that moment, I made a decision. I would confront her privately about her behavior and intentions. Perhaps I was misinterpreting things. Perhaps there was still a way to salvage our family relationship before it was too late. Little did I know that this confrontation would lead to the most humiliating moment of my life, and ultimately, to an outcome none of us could have predicted. I found an opportunity to speak with Jessica alone when she stepped onto the terrace for a brief respite from the reception. The evening air was cool, and strings of white lights illuminated the garden below. She was adjusting her veil when I approached. "It's been a beautiful wedding," I began, keeping my tone gentle and conversational. "You must be pleased with how everything turned out." Jessica turned, seeming surprised to find me there. "Yes, it's exactly what I envisioned." She looked past me, as if hoping someone else would join us. "Jessica, I was hoping we might have a moment to talk. Just the two of us. Family to family." She sighed, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "I suppose we have a few minutes before the cake cutting." "I've noticed some tension between us," I said carefully. "I want you to know that I'm committed to building a good relationship with you, for Thomas's sake. Whatever concerns or misunderstandings we've had, I'm sure we can work through them." For a brief moment her expression softened, and I felt a flicker of hope. Then two of her bridesmaids stepped onto the terrace, champagne glasses in hand. Instead of asking for privacy, Jessica's demeanor changed instantly. "Actually, Leland, since we're having this conversation," she said, her voice noticeably louder, "there is something specific I wanted to discuss with you." The bridesmaids paused, clearly interested in what was unfolding. More guests began to drift toward the terrace doors, drawn by Jessica's theatrical tone. "Thomas and I will need a proper home to start our family," she continued, straightening her shoulders. "That house of yours is far too large for just one person, and it's in an excellent school district." I blinked, caught off guard by her directness. "My house? Jessica, that's my home." "Be practical, Leland. A young family needs that house more than a widower. You could easily downsize to a nice condo, perhaps something in a senior community where you'd have company your own age." By now, a small crowd had gathered at the terrace doors. I could see Thomas inside, engaged in conversation with his best man, unaware of what was happening. "I appreciate your concern," I said quietly, trying to steer the conversation back to privacy. "But that house holds 40 years of memories for me. It's where I raised Thomas, where Margaret and I built our life together." Jessica rolled her eyes, a gesture clearly meant for her audience rather than for me. "You can't live in the past forever. Thomas is starting a new chapter now, with me. Wouldn't you want to help us begin our life together properly?" "I've already been generous with my wedding contribution," I reminded her. "And the gift I gave Thomas today was substantial." "A check?" She laughed dismissively. "That barely covers the cost of the honeymoon. I'm talking about a real gift, one that would make a difference to our future." More guests were watching now. I could see Jessica's parents among them, her father looking oddly pleased while her mother appeared uncomfortable. My cheeks burned with embarrassment, but I maintained my composure. "Jessica, this is hardly the appropriate time or place for this discussion," I said firmly. "Today is about celebrating your marriage, not negotiating property." Her expression hardened. "When would be a better time? After I'm pregnant? After you've wasted more years rattling around in that big house alone? A young family needs this house more than you do." Her voice had risen to the point where even guests inside the reception could hear. Thomas finally noticed the commotion and began making his way through the crowd toward us. "My answer is no," I said, keeping my voice level despite my racing heart. "The house is not up for discussion. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think it's time for the cake cutting." As I turned to leave, Jessica grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my suit jacket. "You're being selfish and outdated. That house is Thomas's inheritance anyway. Why make us wait?" "Because it's my home," I replied, gently removing her hand. "And it's not just about the property value, it's about respect." Thomas finally pushed through to the terrace, looking alarmed. "What's going on here?" Before I could speak, Jessica turned to him with tears suddenly springing to her eyes. "Your father refuses to help us start our life together properly. He'd rather cling to that old house than give us the future we deserve." Thomas looked between us, clearly torn. "Jessica, we talked about this. I told you my dad's house isn't part of our plans right now." "So you're taking his side?" she demanded. "After I've spent months planning this perfect day for us?" "There are no sides here," I interjected calmly. "This is a family discussion that should happen privately, not at your wedding reception." Jessica turned back to me, her face flushed with anger. "Let me make something crystal clear, Leland. Either you sign that house over to us, or you'll never see your grandchildren. I will make sure Thomas understands exactly where his loyalties should lie." A collective gasp went up from the onlookers. Thomas stood frozen, his expression a mixture of shock and shame. I felt as if all the air had been sucked from my lungs. "Jessica, please," Thomas finally said. "This isn't right." "What isn't right," she snapped, "is your father trying to control our future from his fortress of outdated furniture and faded memories." I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to recognize the manipulation happening before his eyes. But he remained silent, trapped between his new wife and his father. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Jessica," I said quietly. But my answer remains no. What happened next occurred so quickly that I barely had time to react. Jessica's face contorted with rage, and she swung her open palm toward my face. The slap connected with a crack that seemed to silence every voice on the terrace. My cheek stung from the impact, but it was the public humiliation that cut deeper. Dozens of witnesses stood watching as a bride in white struck her father-in-law at her own wedding reception. Thomas stood motionless, his mouth open in shock but no words coming to my defense. For a long moment no one moved. Then Jessica's mouth curved into a triumphant smirk, as if she had proven something important. I could see in her eyes that she believed she had won, that she had demonstrated her power over both Thomas and me. With as much dignity as I could muster, I straightened my tie and turned away from the scene. As I walked through the parting crowd of stunned guests, I heard whispers and saw pitying glances. My face burned with shame, not for anything I had done, but for allowing myself to become a victim in what should have been a joyful family celebration. In that moment of public humiliation, something crystallized within me. This was not just about a house or wedding tensions. This was about standing up for myself and the values Margaret and I had built our lives upon. It was about protecting not just my home, but my self-respect. I found a quiet alcove off the main hallway, away from the curious stares and whispered conversations. My cheek still tingled from Jessica's slap, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. Not just from the public humiliation, but from Thomas's silence in the face of it. For a few minutes, I simply stood there, collecting my thoughts. A large mirror hung on the wall across from me, and I caught sight of my reflection. My tie was slightly askew, my face flushed with emotion. But what struck me most was the expression in my eyes, a look of wounded dignity that reminded me startlingly of my father in his later years. "What would you do, Margaret?" I whispered, adjusting my tie pin, the silver oak leaf catching the light. In the stillness of that moment, I could almost feel her presence, her steady wisdom that had guided our family for so many years. The answer came with surprising clarity. Margaret would never have allowed anyone to disrespect our family values, our home, or our marriage. She would have stood firm with grace and resolve, and she would have expected me to do the same. A calm determination washed over me. I had spent months making excuses for Jessica's behavior, compromising my own dignity in hopes of maintaining peace. I had allowed my role in my son's life to be diminished out of fear of losing him entirely. But in doing so, I was betraying everything Margaret and I had built together, everything we had taught Thomas about integrity and respect. I took out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number for Robert Whitman, my attorney for over 30 years and one of my closest friends. Robert had helped draft my will, had advised me through numerous business decisions, and had stood by me during Margaret's funeral. If anyone would understand the complexity of this situation, it would be him. It was nearly 9 o'clock on a Saturday evening, but I knew Robert would answer. 3 rings and his familiar baritone voice came through. "Leland, aren't you at Thomas's wedding tonight?" "I am, Robert," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "And I need your help with an urgent matter." Briefly, I explained the situation, from Jessica's escalating behavior over the months to the humiliating confrontation that had just occurred. Robert listened without interruption. "She physically assaulted you? In front of witnesses?" he asked, his tone shifting from friendly to professional. "Yes. And she explicitly threatened to keep future grandchildren from me if I don't sign over my house." Robert's response was immediate and firm. "This is elder abuse and coercion, Leland. We need to document this while it's fresh. I'm sending over my associate Kevin and our investigator Michael. They can be there in 15 minutes. Where exactly is the venue?" I provided the details of the Newbury estate. "What should I do until they arrive?" "Return to the reception if you can do so comfortably. Don't engage further with Jessica or her family. Just observe and remember details. Kevin and Michael will handle the rest." "Thank you, Robert. I appreciate this more than I can say." "That's what friends are for, Leland. And for what it's worth, Margaret would be proud of you for standing up for yourself." After ending the call, I straightened my jacket, took a deep breath, and walked back toward the reception hall. A strange sense of peace had settled over me. For months, I had been walking on eggshells, afraid of upsetting the delicate balance of family relationships. Now that the worst had happened, there was a certain freedom in no longer having to maintain pretenses. Re-entering the reception, I noticed the atmosphere had shifted. Small clusters of guests were engaged in hushed conversations, many casting glances my way. Jessica and her parents were huddled near the gift table, speaking intensely. Thomas stood apart from them, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking lost. I avoided them all, instead finding a seat at an empty table near the back of the room. From this vantage point, I could observe the entire reception. The cake had been cut in my absence, but the celebration seemed subdued now, as if the earlier confrontation had cast a pall over the festivities. Several of Thomas's longtime friends approached my table, offering awkward words of support. His college roommate Brian clasped my shoulder and murmured, "That was totally out of line, Mr. Walsh. Thomas knows it too, even if he's not saying so right now." I thanked them for their kindness, but kept my responses minimal. This was not the time to gather allies or further divide the wedding party. I simply needed to wait for Robert's colleagues to arrive. Across the room, I could see Jessica watching me warily. She had clearly expected me to leave after her public display, and my calm return seemed to unsettle her. She whispered something to Thomas, who glanced my way with a troubled expression but made no move to approach me. Exactly 15 minutes after my call, as the band was playing a half-hearted rendition of a popular dance tune that few guests were enjoying, the reception hall doors opened. 2 men in impeccable suits entered, scanning the room until they spotted me. One carried a slim leather briefcase, the other a tablet computer. As they walked purposefully toward my table, conversations around the room quieted. Jessica straightened abruptly, nudging her father, who turned to stare at the newcomers with obvious suspicion. Kevin Peterson, Robert's young associate whom I had met several times before, reached me first, shaking my hand firmly. "Mr. Walsh, thank you for calling us. We came as quickly as we could." Michael Donahue, the private investigator who had occasionally helped with contractor background checks for my business, nodded respectfully. "Mr. Walsh, sorry we're meeting again under these circumstances." The formal professional tone of their greeting seemed to ripple through the reception hall. These were clearly not wedding guests dropping by to offer congratulations. Their presence signaled something serious and official. Jessica, perhaps sensing the shift in power, began making her way toward us, her wedding dress rustling as she moved through the tables. Her parents followed close behind, while Thomas hesitated before reluctantly joining the procession. I stood to greet them, Kevin and Michael flanking me on either side. For the first time since I had known her, Jessica looked uncertain, her confident facade cracking slightly at the edges. "Who are these people, Leland?" she demanded, though her voice lacked its earlier imperious tone. "This is a private wedding celebration." Kevin stepped forward, presenting his business card. "Kevin Peterson, attorney at law with Whitman, Johnson and Associates. This is Michael Donahue, licensed private investigator. We're here representing Mr. Leland Walsh regarding an incident that occurred earlier this evening." Jessica's face paled beneath her makeup. "What incident?" "There was just a minor family disagreement, Mrs. Hamilton Walsh," Michael said calmly. Using her new married name with deliberate formality, "We have reason to believe that your actions this evening constitute elder abuse under Massachusetts law, specifically emotional abuse and coercion, culminating in physical assault." A collective gasp went up from the nearby guests who could overhear. Thomas stepped forward, his expression shocked. "What are you talking about? What's going on, Dad?" I met my son's eyes steadily. "I'm standing up for myself, Thomas. Something I should have done months ago." Jessica let out a nervous laugh. "This is ridiculous. We were just having a heated discussion about family planning." "Actually," Kevin said, opening his briefcase and removing a folder, "we have been documenting a pattern of concerning behavior for some time." "What?" Jessica's voice rose an octave. "That's impossible." Michael tapped his tablet screen and turned it toward Thomas. "Mr. Thomas Walsh, were you aware of these text messages your wife sent to her friends regarding her plans for your father's property?" Thomas leaned forward, his face growing increasingly pale as he read the screen. I couldn't see the messages from where I stood, but the shock on his face told me everything I needed to know. "Jess, tell me you didn't write this," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "Tell me you didn't say you were only tolerating my senile old man until you could secure the real estate." Jessica's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her father stepped forward, attempting to take control of the situation. "Now see here. This is a private family matter that can be discussed at a more appropriate time." "Mr. Hamilton," Kevin replied firmly, "I have to disagree. When an elderly individual is physically assaulted and financially coerced, it becomes a legal matter, especially when it happens in front of dozens of witnesses." "Nobody was assaulted," Jessica snapped, finding her voice again. "It was just a tap on the cheek." "A slap," corrected one of the bridesmaids who had witnessed the terrace confrontation. "We all saw it, Jess." Kevin continued calmly. "Mr. Walsh has instructed us to prepare a restraining order application, which we will file with the court first thing Monday morning. Additionally, we're prepared to pursue charges of elder abuse and assault if necessary." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes, but I recognized them now for what they were, tactical rather than genuine. "Thomas, are you going to let this happen? Are you going to let your father destroy our wedding day with these ridiculous accusations?" Thomas looked from Jessica to me, then back to the tablet Michael still held. "These messages, they go back months. You've been planning this since before the engagement?" "It's not what it looks like," Jessica insisted, reaching for his arm, which he pulled away. "You know how girls talk in group chats? It was just venting. You called my father a walking checkbook and said you couldn't wait until he kicked the bucket so we could renovate that museum he calls a house," Thomas read aloud, his voice growing stronger with each word. Jessica's face crumpled, real tears now replacing the theatrical ones. "Thomas, please." Her mother stepped forward, attempting damage control. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to calm down. These messages are being taken out of context." "There is no context," Thomas said firmly, "that makes this acceptable." Kevin addressed me directly. "Mr. Walsh, would you like us to proceed with the restraining order paperwork tonight? We've brought the forms with us." Before I could answer, Jessica broke down completely, sobbing into her hands, her carefully applied wedding makeup streaking down her cheeks. "You're ruining everything. This was supposed to be perfect." "No, Jessica," I said quietly. "You did that yourself when you decided my home and my relationship with my son were commodities to be acquired." Her parents moved to comfort her, but their expressions had shifted from indignation to embarrassment. The evidence was too clear, the witnesses too numerous for them to maintain the pretense that I was overreacting. Thomas stood apart from the family group, his new wedding band catching the light as he ran his hand through his hair in distress. "Dad, I had no idea. I swear to you, I never knew she was saying these things." "I believe you, son," I said gently. "But I think we have some serious family discussions ahead of us." Jessica's father finally addressed me directly, his businessman's instincts taking over. "Leland, surely we can resolve this privately, without legal proceedings. For Thomas's sake, I've spent months trying to resolve things privately," I replied. "That approach ended when your daughter slapped me and threatened to keep my grandchildren from me unless I surrendered my home." The wedding guests had fallen silent, watching the drama unfold like a scene from a movie. The band had stopped playing entirely, the lead singer awkwardly holding his microphone at his side. Jessica, seeing that her tears were not having the desired effect, suddenly straightened up, her expression hardening. "Fine. If that's how you want it, Thomas can choose right now. Me, his wife, or his father, who clearly can't let go of the past." Thomas looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "That's your response? To make me choose? After I just read messages where you called my father terrible names and plotted to take his house?" "Those messages were private," she protested. "So was our wedding supposed to be," Thomas replied quietly. "Until you decided to publicly humiliate my father and demand his home." Jessica turned to her parents, clearly expecting them to intervene on her behalf. But even they seemed at a loss for words now. The facade of the perfect family wedding had crumbled beyond repair. "Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton," Kevin said professionally, "I suggest you take your daughter home to consider her options. A restraining order, once filed, becomes public record. That could have professional implications for all parties involved." Mrs. Hamilton finally found her voice. "Jessica, that's enough. We're leaving now." She turned to the stunned wedding guests who were still watching the scene unfold. "The reception is concluded. Thank you all for coming." With as much dignity as they could muster, Jessica's parents each took one of her arms and began leading her toward the exit. She looked back once, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief, as if she still couldn't comprehend how her perfect plan had unraveled so completely. As they left, Thomas turned to me, tears in his eyes. "Dad, I am so sorry. I should have seen this coming. I should have stood up for you on the terrace." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "We both missed some warning signs, son. But it's not too late to make things right." The remaining guests began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about the unexpected conclusion to the wedding. Some approached to express their support, while others slipped away awkwardly, unsure of the appropriate response to such an unprecedented situation. As the hall emptied, Thomas, Kevin, Michael, and I were left standing amid the abandoned reception decorations, the elaborate wedding cake half-eaten, the champagne glasses still partially filled on many tables. "What happens now?" Thomas asked, his voice small and uncertain, like when he was a child facing the consequences of a mistake. "Now," I said gently, "we go home and figure out our next steps together. As a family." The days following the wedding disaster unfolded in a blur of legal meetings and emotional conversations. Thomas had moved back into his old bedroom in my house, bringing only a small suitcase of personal belongings. The rest of his things remained in the apartment he had shared with Jessica, a problem to be sorted out later. Kevin and Robert had filed for a temporary restraining order first thing Monday morning, citing the public assault and documented pattern of elder abuse. The judge had granted it immediately, ordering Jessica to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from me and my property for 30 days, pending a full hearing. 3 days after the wedding, Thomas and I sat in Robert's wood-paneled office, reviewing the evidence that Michael had compiled. The collection was more extensive than I had realized, including screenshots of group chats provided by one of Jessica's bridesmaids who had been uncomfortable with the increasingly manipulative conversations. "I can't believe Amanda turned these over," Thomas said, flipping through the printed messages. "She and Jessica have been friends since college." "Amanda approached me at the rehearsal dinner," Michael explained. "She said she'd been trying to talk Jessica out of her plans for months, but Jessica was convinced she was entitled to your father's property." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "All those times Jessica was texting during our dates, during family dinners. She was strategizing about this?" Robert nodded grimly. The messages establish a clear pattern of intent. Combined with the witness statements from the wedding, we have a strong case for emotional abuse and attempted financial coercion. What about the physical assault? Thomas asked. The slap? That strengthens the case considerably, Kevin replied, particularly because it happened in front of so many witnesses. We've already collected 12 sworn statements. I sat quietly, letting the legal team explain the situation to Thomas. My son's face grew more troubled with each revelation, the full extent of Jessica's deception becoming clearer to him by the minute. There's more, Michael said, pulling out another folder. Jessica has a history of this behavior. Her previous boyfriend's elderly mother owned a vacation property in Cape Cod. Shortly after they got engaged, the mother mysteriously changed her will to leave the property to Jessica instead of her son. When the relationship ended, there was a legal battle over undue influence. Thomas looked up sharply. She never mentioned an engagement before me. It didn't make it to the wedding, Michael explained. They broke up when the mother's other children got involved and challenged the will change. So I wasn't special, Thomas said bitterly. I was just the next target. I finally spoke up. Son, she chose you because you are special. Because you're kind and trusting. Those are virtues, not weaknesses, even if someone took advantage of them. Thomas rubbed his eyes wearily. What do we do now? Robert leaned forward across his desk. The restraining order buys us time. My recommendation is that Thomas consult with a family law attorney about annulment options. Given the circumstances, fraud in the inducement would be a viable argument. Annulment? Thomas repeated, the word seeming to make the situation finally real to him. That means legally, the marriage never happened. Exactly, Kevin confirmed, which would be preferable to a divorce in this case, both emotionally and financially. Our conversation was interrupted by Robert's assistant announcing an unexpected visitor. Mr. Walsh, Jessica's father is here asking to speak with you. He's alone. Thomas tensed. You don't have to see him, Dad. Actually, I think I should, I replied, surprising myself with how calm I felt. Robert, would you mind joining us? Mr. Hamilton looked nothing like the confident businessman I had met at the wedding. His expensive suit was slightly rumpled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He stood awkwardly in Robert's conference room, declining the offer to sit. Leland, Thomas, he nodded to each of us. I've come to apologize for my daughter's behavior and to see if we can resolve this situation without further legal proceedings. Robert remained professionally neutral. My client has already obtained a temporary restraining order, Mr. Hamilton. What exactly are you proposing? Hamilton sighed heavily. My wife and I had no idea the extent of Jessica's plans. We knew she admired your home, Leland, but we never imagined she was pursuing Thomas with ulterior motives. With all due respect, sir, Thomas said, his voice tight with anger, your daughter slapped my father in front of dozens of people when he refused to give her his house. That goes beyond admiring the property. I know, and it's inexcusable, Hamilton agreed. Jessica has always been determined. But this time she's gone too far. Her mother and I have insisted she seek professional help. That's commendable, I said carefully, but it doesn't change what happened or her intentions toward my family. Hamilton nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. I understand. I'm not here to defend her actions. I'm here to make things right, if possible. How do you propose to do that? Robert asked. First, I want to assure you that Jessica will not contest an annulment. She recognizes that the marriage was ill-advised. Thomas flinched at the clinical description of what should have been the most important commitment of his life. Second, Hamilton continued, we're prepared to cover all costs associated with the wedding and any legal expenses you've incurred as a result of this situation. Robert made a note on his legal pad. That's a start. What about the restraining order? Jessica has agreed to extend it voluntarily, indefinitely. She understands that her behavior was unacceptable and that contact would not be welcome. I studied Hamilton's face, seeing not just embarrassment but genuine shame. This can't be easy for you as her father, I said, my tone softening slightly. He met my eyes directly for the first time. No, it isn't. But as parents, we sometimes have to acknowledge when our children have done wrong. Jessica's mother and we may have contributed to her sense of entitlement. That's something we need to address as a family. The conversation continued for another hour, hammering out details of the agreement. Thomas would file for an annulment on grounds of fraud. Jessica would not contest it. The Hamiltons would cover all financial costs, and Jessica would seek therapy to address her manipulative behavior. As Hamilton prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Thomas, for what it's worth, I believe my daughter did care for you, in her way. Her methods were inexcusable, but I don't think her feelings were entirely fabricated." Thomas nodded stiffly, but said nothing. After Hamilton left, Robert looked at both of us with genuine concern. "How are you holding up, both of you?" "Still processing," Thomas admitted. "1 week ago I thought I was starting my life with someone who loved me. Now I'm filing for an annulment and living in my childhood bedroom." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "One step at a time, son. We'll get through this together." Robert smiled sympathetically. "For what it's worth, you're both handling this with remarkable dignity. Many families would be torn apart by something like this." On our drive home, Thomas was quiet, staring out the window at the familiar neighborhoods of our Boston suburb. Finally, he spoke. "I should have listened to you from the beginning, Dad. You saw through her when I couldn't." "Love makes us willing to overlook things," I replied. "Don't be too hard on yourself. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't called your attorney that night. If you had just left the wedding humiliated, she would have kept pushing until she got what she wanted." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. "Probably. But that's not what happened. You saw the truth before it was too late." "Because you had the courage to stand up for yourself," he said, "even when I didn't stand up for you." When we arrived home, Thomas paused in the driveway, looking up at the house I had built so many years ago. "You know, I never fully appreciated this place until now. Not just the house itself, but what it represents. The life you and Mom built together. It's your heritage," I said simply. "Not something to be taken, but something to be shared. When the time is right." Inside, as we settled in the living room with cups of coffee, Thomas noticed Margaret's photo on the mantel. "Mom would have seen through Jessica immediately, wouldn't she?" I smiled, remembering my wife's uncanny ability to read people, within 5 minutes of meeting her. "I miss her wisdom," Thomas said softly. "I could use some of it right now. She'd tell you that making mistakes is how we learn, as long as we don't make the same ones twice." I paused, considering my next words carefully. "And she'd be proud of how you've handled this past week. Facing the truth isn't easy." That evening, as Thomas called friends to explain the situation and I prepared dinner in the kitchen where Margaret had taught our son to bake cookies, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over our home. The path ahead wouldn't be simple. There would be legal proceedings, awkward explanations, and emotional healing for Thomas. But for the first time in months, our family relationship felt honest again. The foundation Margaret and I had built was strong enough to weather this storm. And Thomas was beginning to find his way back to the values we had raised him with, away from Jessica's materialistic influence. As difficult as the wedding day had been, that moment of public humiliation had ultimately led to truth and freedom. Sometimes, I reflected, it takes a crisis to reveal what matters most. And sometimes, the simple act of picking up a phone can change everything. The weeks following the wedding catastrophe brought significant changes to our lives. Thomas's annulment proceeded smoothly, as Jessica's father had promised. The legal document stating that the marriage had never legally existed arrived 6 weeks after the ill-fated wedding day. Thomas held the papers in his hands for a long time, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering sadness. "It feels strange," he confessed as we sat on the back porch that evening, legally erasing something that felt so real to me. "The feelings were real," I assured him. "Your commitment was genuine, even if hers wasn't." Thomas had thrown himself into work, taking on additional projects at his architectural firm. The distraction seemed healthy, giving him purpose during a time when his personal life had been upended. He'd also started running in the mornings before work, something he hadn't done since college. The physical exertion, he told me, helped clear his mind. For my part, I found myself reflecting on how I had allowed my own boundaries to be eroded over the months leading up to the wedding. In my desire to support Thomas's relationship, I had tolerated disrespect and manipulation that Margaret would never have permitted. This realization led me to weekly coffee meetings with my old friend Calvin, a retired psychologist who helped me process the experience. "You can love your child without sacrificing your own dignity," Calvin reminded me during one of our conversations. In fact, maintaining healthy boundaries teaches them more than acquiescence ever could. The restraining order against Jessica became permanent by mutual agreement. According to her father, with whom I maintained limited contact. She had moved to Chicago to work at her uncle's company, putting welcome distance between our families. Thomas occasionally received apologetic text messages from her, which he showed me, but rarely responded to. "She still doesn't really get it," he observed after one particularly lengthy message. "She's sorry she got caught, not sorry for what she tried to do." About 3 months after the wedding, Thomas came down to breakfast on a Saturday morning with a determined look on his face. "Dad, I think it's time I found my own place again." I nodded, having expected this moment. "You're always welcome here. But I agree, it's probably time. Not because I don't appreciate being here," he hastened to add. "These months at home have been, too, healing. But I need to start rebuilding my life." "I understand completely. Want help looking at apartments?" Thomas smiled, the genuine smile I had missed during his time with Jessica. "Actually, I was thinking of renting one of the units in that converted factory building downtown, the one with the exposed brick. It's close enough that we can still have Sunday dinners together." "That sounds perfect." As Thomas settled into his new apartment, our relationship evolved into something stronger than before. He began inviting me to social gatherings with his friends, something that had rarely happened during his relationship with Jessica. I found myself enjoying the company of his circle, particularly his colleague Sarah, a landscape architect with a quick wit and kind eyes. "Your dad is cooler than you led us to believe," she teased Thomas one evening when a group of us had gathered at a local pub for trivia night. "I'm discovering that myself," Thomas replied, glancing at me with genuine appreciation. About 6 months after the wedding fiasco, Thomas brought Sarah to our regular Sunday dinner. Unlike Jessica, she arrived with a homemade apple pie and sincere questions about the family photos displayed throughout the house. When I mentioned Margaret's passion for gardening, Sarah asked to see the backyard and spent an hour discussing different perennials with genuine interest. "She seems lovely," I commented after she had left. "We're just friends," Thomas said quickly, though his slight blush suggested the potential for more. "But yes, she is." "Just an observation," I replied, not wanting to push. "She has an authentic quality that's refreshing." Thomas helped me clear the dinner dishes, something Jessica had never once offered to do. "You know what Sarah asked me the other day? Whether you might be willing to give her some advice on restoring her grandfather's old writing desk. She said anyone who built a house like this would understand the value of preserving family heirlooms." I smiled at the stark contrast to Jessica's attitude toward the house and its contents. "I'd be happy to help her with that." As fall turned to winter, I found myself embracing new activities and connections. I joined a woodworking class at the community center where I met several other retirees with similar interests. I began hosting monthly poker nights with old friends who had drifted away during Margaret's illness. And I started volunteering at the local high school, teaching basic carpentry skills in their vocational program. Life was moving forward in unexpected but welcome ways. The house still held Margaret's presence, but it was no longer a shrine to the past. It was living and evolving, just as she would have wanted it to. One evening, in early spring, nearly a year after the wedding day, Thomas called with news. "Dad, I've been offered a position on the Historical Preservation Committee. It's volunteer work, but it's something I'm really passionate about." "That sounds perfect for you," I said, genuinely proud. "Your mother would be thrilled." There was a pause before he continued. "Actually, that's part of why I called. The first project is evaluating homes for historical designation, and I immediately thought of our house. Would you be open to having it considered? It would mean certain protections for the property, ensuring it remains as you and Mom designed it, even in the future." I felt a rush of emotion at his words. This was so different from Jessica's demand for the house as a possession. Thomas was thinking about preserving its legacy, about honoring the craftsmanship and memories it contained. "I think that would be wonderful," I said. "And speaking of the future, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." "What's that?" "I'm considering setting up a living trust for the house. It would remain in my name while I'm alive, but eventually transfer to you without the complications of probate. Not because anyone is pressuring me, but because I want to plan properly." Thomas's voice was thick with emotion when he responded. "That means a lot, Dad. But please know I'm in no hurry. I want you in that house for decades to come." The following Sunday dinner became something of a celebration. Thomas brought Sarah again, and this time their relationship status was clear from their intertwined hands and shared glances. My poker buddies Calvin and Richard joined us, along with my new friend Evelyn from the community center's gardening club, who had been helping me restore Margaret's flower beds. As we gathered around the dining table, I looked at the faces of people who genuinely cared about each other, who respected boundaries and shared values. It struck me how different this felt from the tense family meals with Jessica, where every interaction had been laden with hidden agendas. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down, Thomas pulled me aside. "Dad, I never properly thanked you for what you did that day at the wedding. Not just standing up to Jessica, but showing me what real strength looks like." "How do you mean?" I asked. "You didn't yell or make a scene. You didn't lower yourself to her level. You just quietly made a phone call and set boundaries. It taught me more about dignity than any lecture could have." I smiled, remembering the calm that had come over me in that moment of decision. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in someone else's drama. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking a lot about what makes a real home. It's not just the structure or the location. It's the integrity of the people inside it." "Your mother used to say something similar," I replied. "She believed a home should be a place of both comfort and truth." As our guests departed and Thomas helped me with the final cleanup, I realized how fortunate I was. Despite the painful experience with Jessica, or perhaps because of it, Thomas and I had found our way to a more authentic relationship. The house that Jessica had coveted remained a home filled with love and respect, not a prize to be claimed or a possession to be acquired. Standing in the kitchen that Margaret and I had designed together 40 years earlier, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had protected what mattered most. Not just the physical structure, but the values it represented. And in doing so, I had helped Thomas find his way back to those same values. The path forward was clear now, uncluttered by manipulation or false pretenses. Thomas was building a life based on genuine connections. I was embracing new friendships and activities while honoring Margaret's memory. And the home we shared, whether physically or in spirit, remained a sanctuary of truth and love. Have you ever faced a situation where someone tried to take advantage of your generosity? Did you find the strength to stand up for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I hope this story reminds you that it is never too late to set boundaries and protect what matters most. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember to like, subscribe, and share if this resonated with you. Together, we can support each other through life's challenging moments